Okay, good morning, everybody. At this point, you have two choices for our next few classes together. One is to learn directly with Rabbi Teller in a small group with me, or to learn virtually through these different videos. We're going to be making 3 or 4 of them over the next couple of classes. The advantage being of doing it this way that you can pause, you can rewind, you can make sure you're really understanding what we are learning over here. Just before we jump into the source that I've boxed in front of you, I want to take one quick step back and frame this discussion. We learned a pretty challenging Gemara in class last week, which suggested that only men and only boys are chayav in learning Torah, and girls are not. It comes down to the words in the Shema. V'limadatem otam et b'neichem ledaber bam. You have to teach your son's Torah. Maybe you don't have to teach your daughter's Torah. And from that distinction, we kind of took it in 3 steps. Girls who may not be obligated to learn Torah, therefore don't have an obligation to teach Torah. If they don't have an obligation to teach Torah, they don't have an obligation to be taught Torah. And understandably, in the year 2020, so that distinction between boys and girls not being obligated, what exactly does that mean? Are girls allowed to learn Torah? If they do they still get schar? Do they still get reward for learning Torah? Or not? And what exactly, again, is the basis of this distinction? So we're going to jump into this discussion, and it really is a fascinating development, both in terms of understanding this particular topic, but also in terms of understanding how halacha can develop. Again, from the Mishnah, written in the year approximately 200 to the year 2020, we're talking about almost 2,000 years, and there's a lot that's really changed. Obviously, in society, we're going to see some fascinating development and understanding of these various halachot as well. So to kind of start us off, I'm going to make you aware of our 3 driving questions of this unit. So let's look at it over here. Women in learning Torah. Let's look at our 3 driving questions for this topic. Question number 1 is, maybe I'll space these out a little bit. Are women allowed / encouraged to learn Torah or to be taught Torah? Right? We know they're not chayav in it. Are they allowed to learn Torah? Do we encourage girls to learn Torah? Right? What exactly is that all about? How do we understand it from halachic sources? That's number 1. Question number 2, is there any difference between different types of learning? So I wrote here between learning Tanakh and learning Gemara, for example, meaning once we say, let's say women are allowed to learn Torah, or they're encouraged to learn Torah, well, are there any distinctions between different topics? For example, Tanakh versus Gemara. And what is the basis of the idea that learning Gemara for girls is controversial? We know that there are schools, a little more to a different maybe camp than ours, so to say, within obviously Orthodoxy, that they don't learn Gemara. So what exactly is the basis of that? Which really follows question number 3. So what's the basis of having this Gemara class? Let's get very, very practical. You've been learning Gemara for 3 or 4 years, at least in the high school. So what exactly is the basis for having this class, which hopefully will emerge to some of our bigger questions, which then is the value of Talmud Torah across the spectrum, and why is Talmud Torah so fundamental in terms of our connection with God and our practice as Jews and passionate as part of the passionate Jewish community and Jewish people that we strive to be. So those are our 3 driving questions. Just before we get to that source then, I want to highlight the Mishnah in Sota. So in addition to our Gemara that again seems to make a distinction between boys and girls in terms of the obligation to learn, the Mishnah in Sota talks about the Sota lady, who, if you remember from maybe learning Parshat HaShavua, if a man suspects his wife of secluding herself with another man, he can take her to the Beit Din. And there's this whole process, if the woman claims she's innocent, that she then has to drink this sota water, this special water, if she was guilty, so it gets a little bit unpleasant what the punishment is. However, the Mishnah talks about that if she has zechut, if this girl, this woman who's being accused, has merit, so even if she drinks the sota water, even if she's guilty, I guess if she has, again, merit, if she's done a lot of good things, the punishment won't happen immediately. It could happen a year later. It could happen 3 years later, 5 years later, whatever it might be. from that, the Mishnah brings out the opinion of the rabbis that from here we learn that it's actually very important, says the Mishnah, to teach women Torah so that they know that this punishment can be delayed, right? Meaning it would be important for a woman to know that because she may drink the water, nothing happens to her, and then she thinks she's fine. So this opinion in the Mishnah says it's actually essential to teach women Torah so they know, for example, in this particular case, that if they drink this water and they're fine, they should understand that, punishment could still happen down the line. But the point is, there is an opinion over here that says we should be teaching women Torah, to which in the Mishnah, we have the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Sorry, that first opinion was the opinion of Ben Azai, who says we should be, from here you learn to teach girls Torah. Rabbi Eliezer argues, and Rabbi Eliezer says, I'll just write it over here, Rabbi Eliezer says, no, women should not learn Torah because anyone who teaches girls Torah, they have taught them tiflut. And it's a very strange word, tiflut. What does it mean if you've taught a girl Torah, you've taught them tiflut? What is that all about? So the Meiri is a Rishon. So the Meiri comes later than these opinions in the Mishnah by almost 1,000 years. And the Meiri explains that the word tiflut comes from the word tafel, which can mean unsalted or bland or imperfect or unfinished. Which means what? Which means anybody, if you try to teach girls Torah, we have the following challenge. Because girls, at least back then, were not given a broader education. So if you try teaching them individual pieces of Torah, they won't have a complete understanding of it. And when you teach them a little bit, they're going to think with that little bit of knowledge, they're going to maybe get a little bit they're going to think they understand it better than they do, which can lead to, significant mistakes. Like we know this, an example I would give is teaching certain pieces of knowledge to our children, for example, right? It's not a great example, but again, back then, understanding on a societal level, right? Women were not given the same educational opportunities as men. Now that's obviously changed, and that's why this discussion is going to continue. But back then, Rabbi Eliezer said, no, don't teach them a little bit of Torah, this halacha, for example, little pieces, because if you do that, it's going to lead to them making some significant mistakes. An example, again, would be, and I've given this example in class, for example, when kids are very young, we teach them, only tell the truth. Only tell the truth, never lie. Now, we know as we get older, so there are times where it might be actually very appropriate to lie. It might be the most appropriate approach to lie. There's even an example brought down in the Mishnah as well, where if a bride, if a husband comes over to you, a groom comes over to you and asks you, my bride is so beautiful, isn't she? You're supposed to answer yes, even if you don't think that bride is particularly beautiful. Why? Says the Mishnah, because the value of shalom, the value of peace, overrides the value of emet, the value of truth. Sometimes it's not that we think lying is good, but there may be other values in certain situations that are better and more important. Now that's a very dangerous idea, to teach somebody that it's okay to lie. And therefore, you would not teach that piece of information to maybe a very young child, right? I have a 6 and 7-year-old at home. I would not teach them, hey, sometimes it's okay to lie, because that's a piece of knowledge that could be, taken advantage of. So too, in a sense, the Meiri explains that if you teach too much Torah, again, this is Rabbi Eliezer's idea, to women who are only getting now an unfinished understanding of Torah, it could lead to significant mistakes. So that's very, very interesting. But that's not the end of the discussion by any means. But we see this word tiflut come up, and it makes us need to understand, well, what exactly is it? Does it still apply today? When does it apply, etc.? So from there, we can now go into the Shulchan Aruch, right? The Shulchan Aruch, written by Rav Yosef Cairo in the year 1500. So this is, well after the writing of that Mishnah. It's already 1,300 years after the Mishnah. But the Shulchan Aruch is going to use some of that language and take it a little further. We're going to read this and translate this Shulchan Aruch inside. And then we're going to ask 2 questions on it. And that's going to be the end of video number 1. Here we go. Isha shelamda Torah yesh la sachar. So right away, a really important idea. A woman who learns Torah, she gets reward. Okay, so that's already very, very interesting and important to note, which kind of answers our first driving question. Are women allowed to learn Torah? Well, clearly yes, and they get schar if they learn it. But let's keep going. And yes, this gets a little controversial. I'm totally prepared for that discussion. But let's, again, like I said, let's hold off all of our judgments until we finish this entire sugya. We're going to develop it at length. Aval lo kischara ish. However, a woman's reward for learning Torah is not the same as a man's reward for learning Torah. Mipnei she'ena mitzuva ve'osa. Because ultimately, she's not commanded to do it. A man is commanded to learn Torah, and therefore his reward is going to be different than a woman's reward who's not commanded. Now, we can get into a whole discussion. What's harder? Is it harder to do things when you are commanded to do them, or is it harder to do things when you're not commanded to do them? So just think about that for a second. Think about examples in your life where you are told to do something versus when you volunteer to do something. Which one is harder to do? So just keep that in the back of your mind. Let's keep going. Ve'afal pi sheyesh la sachar, even though a woman gets reward for learning, tzivu chazal shelo yelamed adam et bito Torah. Still, Chazal taught that you should not teach, a man should not teach his daughter Torah. So again, a woman gets reward if she learns it, but a father should not teach it to his daughter, mipnei sherov hanashim ein datan mechuvanat litlamed. Because rov hanashim, we're going to get back to that phrase, the majority of women, again back then, their understanding was not ready to learn. Umotziot divrei Torah lidivrei havai lefi aniot datan. And they would then cause all sorts of errors in their understanding of Torah because of their lack of understanding. It's like it really connects to that idea we were just bringing up in the Meiri, that if you teach them directly, based on their lack of understanding, there could be mistakes made. Amru Chachamim, the rabbi said, Kol hamelamed et bito Torah ki'ilu milamda tiflut. Anyone who teaches their daughter Torah, and this is from Rabbi Eliezer in that Mishnah, it's as if they taught them tiflut. Ba'med dvarim amurim. Well, when do we say that if you teach your daughter Torah, it's like teaching them tiflut? When is that? B'Torah shebe'al peh. That's only if you teach them Torah shebe'al peh, Mishnah, Gemara, etc. Aval Torah shebichtav lo yelamed ota lechatchila. But that's not true when it comes to Torah shebichtav, like Tanakh. With Tanakh, you shouldn't teach them it lechatchila, like you shouldn't teach it to them ideally, but if you did teach them, eino kimalamda tiflut. It's not like teaching them tiflut. So a distinction is already made in the Shulchan Aruch between teaching Torah shebichtav and teaching Torah shebe'al peh. Now, granted, even teaching them Torah shebichtav, written Torah, like Chumash, still is problematic, but it's not as problematic, according to the Shulchan Aruch, as teaching Torah shebe'al peh. But very interesting enough. Look at the next line. This is the Ramah. Like we've said before, the Ramah adds the idea of B'nai Ashkenaz, Ashkenazic tradition, and he already says something very important that we're going to take really far from here. Umikol makom, nonetheless, even though there's a whole discussion, what can I teach them, what can I teach them? Chayevet ha'isha, a woman is obligated. Now this is interesting. Suddenly we have the word obligation. Nothing in the Mishnah, the Gemara we've seen so far, it went out of its way to say not obligated. But here it says a woman is obligated lilmod dinim hayashayachim liisha. A woman is obligated to learn laws that are shayach to a woman. Laws that pertain to a Jewish girl. We could start getting into all these different topics. It includes Hilchot Tefillah and Hilchot Tzedakah, but it also include things like being mafrish chala. It'll include things like tarat hamishpacha, seemingly, right, between man and wife. It'll include things like hadlakat nerot, but this could also include things like Hilchot Shabbos and Hilchot Kashrut, right, which are obligated things that are shayach to women as well, right? We're going to have to understand this last line. This Shulchan Aruch is very complicated. There's a lot of questions that come out from it. But let's leave ourselves right now, video number 1, with 2 questions to take from this. Question number 1 is, well, really on this first line. If the Shulchan Aruch goes on to say that if you teach a woman Torah, it's like teaching her tiflut, or you shouldn't do it lechatchila, well then, how can you say that a woman that learns Torah has sachar? Meaning from that first line, it seems like, hey, learning Torah for women is a good thing. Then how can you finish off by saying that it's not a good thing? That's question number 1. And question number 2 is really from this last line, well, what is a woman allowed to learn, right? First you said, not Torah shebich bel peh. They can't learn Mishnah and Gemara because it's tiflut. But then seemingly they can't learn Chumash. Well, what is a woman allowed to learn? Well, they can learn things that are shayach to a woman. What exactly does that include? So those are our 2 driving questions. We now have to go from here. So from our 3 broad questions, we now have 2 driving questions. One is, right, how can a woman get schar, right, which is the word for reward, for learning, if we then say it's a negative thing, tiflut, etc., right? And 2 is, what ultimately is a woman allowed to learn? These are our 2 questions from the Shulchan Aruch. From here, we're going to now take it a number of different ways. To get there, we'll have to go to video number 2.